You think you're in control. You wake up, check your phone, drink your coffee, work your hours, scroll before bed, and repeat. Simple, harmless, just another Tuesday. But here's what Andrew Huberman, a Stanford neuroscientist who has spent decades studying the human brain, wants you to understand. Every single one of those habits is slowly dismantling your neural architecture. You're not optimizing your life. You're systematically destroying the organ that defines your existence. And the most terrifying part, you don't even know it's happening. Your brain is dying in real time, and you're the one holding the knife. Let's start with something you did this morning. You woke up and immediately grabbed your phone, scrolling through notifications, checking emails, diving into the digital abyss before your feet even touched the floor. You think you're getting a head start on the day. You're not. You're flooding your dopamine system with artificial rewards that your brain was never designed to handle. Huberman's research reveals something deeply unsettling. Every time you get that notification ping, that like, that message, you're triggering a dopamine spike that mimics the neurochemical response our ancestors had when they found food or avoided death. But here's the trap. Your brain doesn't distinguish between survival and stimulation. It just knows reward received. And what happens after every peak? A crash, a trough, below baseline. That feeling of emptiness, of needing more, of never being satisfied. That's not weakness. That's neuroscience. You're training your brain to crave constant stimulation. And when you don't get it, you experience a form of neurochemical withdrawal that masquerades as boredom, anxiety, or lack of motivation. The Stoics understood this 2,000 years ago. The more you chase pleasure, the more you become enslaved by it. Huberman just proved it in a laboratory. But it gets darker, because dopamine isn't just about pleasure. It's about anticipation, effort, and the pursuit itself. When you layer dopamine, spiking behaviors on top of each other, scrolling while drinking coffee, listening to music while you work, you're not enhancing your experience. You're eroding your baseline. Over time, your brain requires more stimulation to feel normal. This is the neurological equivalent of inflation. You need bigger hits just to feel what you used to feel naturally. And when those hits don't come, you don't just feel neutral, you feel depressed, unmotivated, dead inside. Huberman calls this dopamine depletion. And it's one of the most insidious forms of self-sabotage because it feels like you. You think you're lazy. You think you lack discipline. But the truth is far more brutal. You've chemically rewired your brain to be unable to do hard things. The effort that used to feel challenging now feels impossible. Not because you're weak, but because you've systematically destroyed your brain's ability to derive satisfaction from effort itself. Machiavelli wrote that fortune favors those who adapt to the times. But what happens when the times are designed to destroy you? Let me tell you something else you're doing wrong. Last night, around 11 p.m., you scrolled through your phone in bed. Maybe you watched videos, read articles, checked social media. The blue light from that screen didn't just keep you awake. It told your brain that the sun was rising. Your suprachiasmatic nucleus, the part of your brain that governs your circadian rhythm, contains cells that are specifically tuned to detect light in the blue wavelength spectrum. When that light hits your retina between the hours of 10 p.m. and 4 a.m., it triggers a cascade of neurological disasters. First, it suppresses melatonin, the hormone that helps you fall asleep. But that's just the beginning. Huberman's research shows that exposure to bright light during these hours also suppresses dopamine production in a brain region called the habenula. This region acts as an anti-reward center. When it's activated by late night light exposure, it doesn't just make you feel less motivated the next day. It triggers a neurochemical state that resembles depression. You wake up and you can't push through obstacles. You can't summon willpower. You feel defeated before you even start. And you blame yourself. You think you're not trying hard enough. But the reality is that you've neurochemically hobbled yourself. Every night you scroll, you're digging your own grave. There's something even more sinister happening in those late hours. The content you consume matters almost as much as the light itself. Your brain is not a passive observer. It's an active participant. When you engage with stressful content, arguments, news, your nervous system activates. Your heart rate increases. Your cortisol rises. And here's the trap. Your brain can't tell the difference between a threat on your screen and a threat in your environment. That means every inflammatory comment you read, every disaster story you consume, every rage-inducing post you encounter is being processed by your amygdala as an immediate danger. Over time, this chronic activation of your stress response doesn't just leave you feeling anxious. It literally remodels your brain. The hippocampus, your memory center, begins to shrink. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational decision-making, loses density. And your amygdala, your fear center, grows larger and more reactive. You become a person who is neurologically primed to perceive threat, incapable of calm, addicted to outrage. This isn't a metaphor. This is structural brain damage, and you're doing it to yourself every single night. Now let's talk about stress. You wear it like a badge of honor. You're busy, you're hustling, you're grinding. You tell people you'll sleep when you're dead. But here's what Huberman discovered about chronic stress. It doesn't make you tougher. It makes you weaker. When you experience acute stress, a challenging workout, a cold shower, a difficult conversation, your body releases cortisol and adrenaline in a short, controlled burst. This is good for you. It's how you build resilience. But when stress becomes chronic, when it lasts more than 4 to 7 days, something catastrophic happens in your brain. The normal feedback loop that regulates cortisol breaks down. Instead of high cortisol signaling your brain to shut down production, it triggers a positive feedback loop. More stress produces more cortisol, which produces more stress, which produces more cortisol. This is a death spiral. And it doesn't just make you feel terrible. It destroys neurons, particularly in the hippocampus, the region responsible for forming new memories. Chronic stress literally makes you dumber. It impairs your ability to learn, to adapt, to remember. The ancient Greeks understood that a sound mind requires a sound body. Huberman proved that a stressed mind is a dying mind. But the damage doesn't stop there. Chronic cortisol elevation fundamentally alters your body's metabolism. Remember that comfort food you crave when you're stressed. That's not a coincidence. High levels of glucocorticoids, the family of stress hormones that includes cortisol, drive you to seek high-fat and high-sugar foods because your body is trying to shut down the stress response through the only mechanism available to it: negative feedback. Eating those foods temporarily reduces stress hormones. But there's a cost. Over time, you develop insulin resistance. You gain visceral fat, the kind that surrounds your organs and increases your risk of heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. Your immune system becomes compromised. You become vulnerable to infections, to illness, to premature aging. The Stoics taught that suffering comes not from external events, but from our judgments about those events. Huberman would add, and from the neurochemical consequences of those judgments sustained over time. You're not just mentally exhausted, you're biologically decaying. Let me tell you about something you probably don't even think about: how you breathe. Right now, as you listen to this, there's a good chance you're breathing through your mouth. It feels natural. It feels easy. But it's killing you. Huberman's research on respiration reveals something profound. Nasal breathing isn't just about air intake. It's about brain function. When you breathe through your nose, especially during inhalation, you activate oscillations in your limbic system, the emotional center of your brain. This nasal respiration entrains neural rhythms in your hippocampus and amygdala, improving memory consolidation, emotional regulation, and your ability to detect novel stimuli. Mouth breathing doesn't do this. When you breathe through your mouth, you're bypassing a sophisticated system that has been refined over millions of years of evolution. You're also overbreathing. Most people take 15 to 18 breaths per minute, when the optimal rate is around 12. This overbreathing creates a state called hypercapnia, where you exhale too much carbon dioxide. And here's the counterintuitive part. Less carbon dioxide means less oxygen delivery to your brain. Your brain becomes hyper-excitable. You can't focus. You feel anxious. Your cognitive performance drops. And you wonder why you can't concentrate. The answer is literally right under your nose. You're suffocating your brain while thinking you're breathing just fine. There's another habit destroying you that seems completely innocent: multitasking. You pride yourself on it. You think it makes you productive. But Huberman's work on working memory and attention reveals a brutal truth. Multitasking is a myth. Your brain doesn't actually process multiple streams of information simultaneously. It rapidly switches between tasks, and every switch has a cost. A cognitive switching cost. Each time you shift your attention, you lose a fragment of your working memory, the mental workspace where you hold and manipulate information. Over time, chronic task switching degrades your ability to sustain deep focus. It weakens the neural circuits in your prefrontal cortex responsible for executive function. You become worse at planning, at problem solving, at thinking abstractly. And here's the darkest part. You don't notice. You think you're being efficient. But studies show that people who multitask regularly have impaired memory, slower processing speed, and reduced creativity compared to those who focus on single tasks. You're not gaining time. You're losing intelligence. The paradox is perfect in your quest to do more. You're making yourself capable of less. Seneca warned that it's not that we have too little time, but that we waste too much of it. Huberman would add, by fragmenting our attention, we're also wasting our minds. Let me hit you with something. You definitely weren't expecting alcohol. You probably think a glass of wine helps you relax. You've heard about the cardiovascular benefits. You associate it with sophistication, with culture. But Huberman's deep dive into alcohol's effects on the brain reveals something most people refuse to accept. Even moderate alcohol consumption is neurotoxic. Every time you drink, alcohol crosses the blood-brain barrier and begins disrupting neural function. It's not just about getting drunk. At a cellular level, alcohol acts as a poison. It damages the cells lining your gut. It increases the permeability of the blood-brain barrier, and it leads to neuronal death, particularly in the hippocampus. That's your memory center. That's where you form new memories, where you learn, where you consolidate experiences. Chronic drinking, even at moderate levels, causes the hippocampus to physically shrink. This leads to cognitive deficits that you might not notice for years. And here's the part that should terrify you: alcohol disrupts sleep architecture. You think it helps you fall asleep faster, and it does. But it obliterates REM sleep, the stage where memory consolidation and emotional processing occur. So you're trading quick sleep onset for long-term cognitive decline. Every drink is a choice, not between drinking and not drinking, but between who you are now and who you could become. The ancient philosophers understood that virtue is found in moderation. Huberman proved that excess is found in brain damage. But there's a deeper, more dangerous truth we haven't touched yet. It's about something so fundamental, so ingrained in modern life, that you probably don't even recognize it as a habit. Sitting. You sit at your desk. You sit in your car. You sit on your couch. You sit, and you sit, and you sit. And while you're sitting, your brain is slowly suffocating. Not metaphorically, literally. When you remain sedentary, blood flow to your brain decreases. The delivery of oxygen and nutrients drops. Waste products accumulate. Your hippocampus, that memory center we keep returning to, begins to atrophy. Studies show that people who are sedentary have smaller hippocampal volumes than those who exercise regularly, regardless of age. But it's not just about size. It's about function. Prolonged sitting impairs neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to form new connections and adapt to new information. It reduces the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that's essential for neuron survival and growth. Without BDNF, your neurons become more vulnerable to damage and less capable of repair. And here's the cascade effect. Less movement means less BDNF, which means worse memory, which means worse learning, which means cognitive decline. The Romans understood that a healthy mind requires a healthy body. Juvenal wrote, "Mens sana in corpore sano," a sound mind in a sound body. 2,000 years later, Huberman proved it with brain scans. Every hour you spend motionless is an hour your brain spends dying. Now, I want you to think about something most people never consider: the architecture of your day. Not what you do, but when you do it. Your brain operates on a 24-hour cycle governed by your circadian rhythm. This isn't just about sleep. It's about when your cortisol peaks, when your dopamine is highest, when your cognitive performance is optimal. Huberman's research shows that cortisol should surge in the morning, within the first hour of waking. This surge, triggered by exposure to sunlight, sets your circadian clock and determines every subsequent phase of your day. It increases alertness, mobilizes energy, and prepares your brain for cognitive work. But most people sabotage this process. They wake up, stay indoors, avoid light, and reach for their phone instead of the sun. This single mistake cascades into disaster. Without that morning cortisol spike, your entire rhythm becomes misaligned. Your energy lags during the day. Your focus deteriorates. And at night, when cortisol should be at its lowest, it remains elevated, keeping you wired, anxious, unable to sleep. This chronic misalignment doesn't just make you tired. It increases your risk of depression, metabolic disease, and cognitive decline. The natural world operates in rhythms. The sun rises and sets. The tides ebb and flow. Your brain is no different. When you ignore these rhythms, you're not just tired. You're neurologically out of sync with reality itself. The ancient mystics knew this. They rose with the sun. They worked with the light. They rested with the dark. Huberman proved they were right all along. There's something else happening to your brain that you need to understand. It's about information. Not the content, but the volume. You consume more information in a single day than a medieval peasant consumed in their entire lifetime. News, social media, emails, messages, videos, articles, podcasts. It never stops, and your brain can't handle it. Every piece of information you encounter requires processing. Your prefrontal cortex has to evaluate, categorize, store, or discard it. This requires energy, specifically glucose and oxygen. But your brain's resources are finite. When you overload your system with information, you exceed your cognitive capacity. What happens then? Your brain starts cutting corners. It processes information superficially. It relies on heuristics and biases. It makes snap judgments without deep analysis. Over time, this trains your brain to be shallow. You lose the ability to think deeply, to engage with complex ideas, to sustain attention on difficult problems. You become intellectually weak, not because you're unintelligent, but because you've conditioned your brain to skim rather than absorb. The tragedy is that you're consuming more information than ever, but learning less than ever. You're confusing exposure with understanding, input with insight. The ancient philosophers had a word for this: sophistry, the appearance of wisdom without its substance. In the modern age, we've perfected it. We've built an entire civilization on the illusion of knowledge. And your brain is paying the price. Let me tell you what this all means. Every habit we've discussed, the phone scrolling, the late night light, the chronic stress, the mouth breathing, the multitasking, the alcohol, the sitting, the circadian misalignment, the information overload, they don't exist in isolation. They compound. They interact. They create a cascade of neurological damage that is greater than the sum of its parts. You're not just making a series of small mistakes. You're engaged in systematic self-destruction. And here's the most brutal truth. You can't see it happening. The brain damage is invisible until it's not, until you find yourself unable to focus, unable to remember, unable to feel motivated, unable to experience joy. At that point, people say you're depressed. They say you're burned out. They say you need therapy or medication, and maybe you do. But what if the real problem is deeper? What if the real problem is that you've spent years, maybe decades, engaged in behaviors that have fundamentally altered the structure and function of your brain? What if depression isn't a chemical imbalance, but a logical consequence of how you've lived? Huberman's research suggests something radical, that many of the mental health crises we face today are not primarily psychiatric problems, but neurological ones. We're not defective, we're damaged. And we're damaged because we've built a world that is fundamentally incompatible with how our brains evolved to function. So what do? You change, not tomorrow, not next week, right now. You start by understanding that your brain is not fixed. It's plastic, capable of change, capable of healing, but only if you give it what it needs. Sunlight in the morning, darkness at night, deep work without distraction, movement throughout the day, stress that is acute and manageable, not chronic and overwhelming, breathing through your nose, protecting your dopamine baseline by avoiding the dopamine stack, sleep that is deep and uninterrupted. You do these things not because they're easy, but because they're necessary, because the alternative is a slow, invisible decay that culminates in a life you don't recognize. The Stoics believed that the obstacle is the way, that difficulty is the path to growth. Huberman proved they were right. Your brain grows stronger when challenged appropriately. It dies when overstimulated, understimulated, or chronically stressed. The choice is yours. Every moment of every day, you're either building your brain or destroying it. There is no neutral. There is only growth or decay. You can't undo the past. You can't reclaim the neurons you've lost. But you can stop the bleeding. You can start today, right now, by making one small change. Turn off your phone before bed. Go outside and look at the sky in the morning. Breathe through your nose. Sit less. Move more. Stop stacking dopamine hits. Do one thing at a time and do it completely. These aren't lifestyle hacks. They're survival strategies. Because the world you live in is designed to destroy your brain. The algorithms, the screens, the food, the stress, the information overload, all of it is optimized for engagement, for profit, for control, not for your well-being, not for your brain health, not for your humanity. You are living in a system that profits from your cognitive decline. And the only way out is awareness, discipline, commitment to something higher than momentary pleasure. The ancient warriors understood this. They trained their bodies and their minds with equal rigor. They knew that strength without wisdom is brutality, and wisdom without strength is impotence. You need both, and you need them now. Because time is running out. Your brain is running out. I'll leave you with this thought. Every decision you make, every habit you repeat, is a vote for the person you're becoming. You can vote for distraction or focus, for stimulation or depth, for comfort or growth, for decline or vitality. And those votes accumulate. Day by day, choice by choice, they compound into the life you live, and the brain you inhabit. In 10 years, you'll either look back at this moment with gratitude or regret. Gratitude that you changed course, or regret that you continued down a path that led to a diminished version of yourself. The neuroscience is clear. The research is undeniable. Your habits are destroying your brain. But they don't have to. You have the power to change. Not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. Not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough to face the truth. The question isn't whether you can change. It's whether you will, and that answer will define everything that comes next. You think you're in control, but until you understand what your daily habits are doing to your brain, you're not. You're a passenger in your own life, watching helplessly as your cognitive function deteriorates, wondering why everything feels harder than it used to. Now you know. The real question is, what are you going to do about it?